I'm curious, with 1 Timothy, I do not permit a woman to teach or authenticate a man over a man.
English translation in most Bibles for this verse doesn't reflect what the Greek is saying.
What does it say in Greek?
Misidentifying what Hesukia is doing causes the meaning of the whole passage to change.
My God, talking about how women should not be teaching. What does all of that mean? Who is Paul talking to? Why is he saying that?
Hello. Welcome to Biblically Speaking. My name is Cassie Bellino, and I'm your host. In this podcast, we talk about the Bible in simple terms with experts, PhDs, and scholarly theologians to make understanding God easier. These conversations have transformed my relationship with Christ and understanding of religion. Now, I'm sharing these recorded conversations with you. On this podcast, we talk about the facts, the history, and the translations to make the Bible make sense, so we can get to know God, our Creator, better.
Hi, it's Cass. I wanted to first start off by saying thank you for listening. I created this because I could not find it anywhere else on the internet, and it takes a very small team and a large upfront investment to make it all possible. I really hope that you find it valuable. I would never expect anything from my listeners, and I'm always going to do my best to first outsource support from brands. However, if you do find value in this episode, I invite you to contribute an amount equal to the value that you have received, either through a one-time or a monthly donation linked in the show notes below. I understand that not everyone, though, can donate monetarily. So I ask that if you love Biblically Speaking and you cannot donate, please show your support by subscribing to this channel wherever you're listening so that it tells the hosting platform to show Biblically Speaking to more curious and confused Christians. In exchange for this support, I personally promise to you to always create the highest quality production possible. Thank you so much for listening. Now let's get to the show.
Hello. Welcome to Biblically Speaking. I'm your host, Cassie Bellino. And if you have been a loyal listener, first of all, thank you. But second of all, you would have known that we just covered a very controversial verse with Dr. Lynn Cohick recently. It was 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 34-35. Women should remain silent in the church. Well, today we're going to look at a very similar verse in a different book. It comes up again. And so now you might be thinking, this might be why it's mentioned so much. Women should be silent. Women should be modest. Women should be covered up. Because in 1 Timothy chapter 2, we see, I do not permit woman to teach or assume authority over a man. And this is so relevant for someone like me who has a microphone, who is a woman, who's trying to teach people and learn. Can I do this? Because I remember distinctly early in the podcasting days, a couple years ago, someone telling me, I wouldn't go to an event if you were on stage because you're a woman and that's what the Bible says. So if we're going to be biblically speaking, we also have to be biblically living. So today I brought in one of my favorite guests. I have preferences in the show, I'll admit it. But Dr. James Sedlacek is back, and we're going to be discussing the exegetical, historical, and contextual understandings around 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 12-15, talking about how women should not be teaching. They should not assume authority. They have to be quiet. What does all of that mean? Who is Paul talking to? Why is he saying that? Why does it sound like a repeat to what was just happening in 1 Corinthians? It's going to be a great episode. But if you are new, perhaps you haven't heard the many episodes I've had Dr. James Sedlacek on, and you should know that he is a genius within his own right. I have your bio here. Let me read it. You are a PhD in biblical studies. You focus on Greek language and linguistics for the New Testament. You have an MDiv in biblical studies on Hebrew, Greek, and biblical interpretations. You currently serve as a professor of biblical languages at the Israel Institute of Biblical Studies. You also teach Greek exegesis and textual criticism at God's Bible School and college. And you are one of the rarest guests because you have such an in-depth understanding of both Old Testament and New Testament language translations and historical context, which is why I think it's just so rare that you find somebody that knows so much. Thank you for coming back on my show. Welcome back.
And thank you, Cassian, for having me. It's always a pleasure to see you again and meet some of the guests that have come on your show and some of the listeners and watchers who asked the questions. And I know one of the sessions we had, there was a bit of Q&A at the end, and that was a blast. Thank you
That
so
was
much.
no, thank you. I literally did a show this morning for someone else's podcast, and they were like, which episodes changed your life the most? And I always say the bleeding woman, because you suggested that. And I was like, why would we talk about the bleeding woman? That's like 2 verses. And like, lo and behold, you and I talked about that for like 2.5 hours. I had to cut so much content out just to make it fit. I think within an hour and a half, like I couldn't even make it an hour. You are just a wealth of knowledge. And I feel like every time you come on the show, it's because you have suggested that we discuss certain verses. You know, it comes from your end on the verses that you want to get into. And so I'm curious with First Timothy, what is your, I want to say like background, like what is your experience? How have you come to know so much about the context of First Timothy?
Well, it starts with kind of one of my research agendas, which is
Okay.
if there's a debated text in the Bible somewhere and there's people debating it, I want to know why.
Okay.
And partly it's because I have a high view of Scripture. I believe that
Mm-hmm.
Scripture should be informing our lives. And if we are looking at the text and we don't know what it means, or we've got 2 different groups of folks who say it means this, no, it means that, that produces a problem for anyone who wants to do what Scripture says.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it really say? And
Yeah.
this piece is less about how can we twist it so that it fits what we want, and it's more about what did it really say in the first place, and how has it been maybe accidentally twisted over the years? I don't know if that's the right language to say, but some cases, and some of what's in tonight's episode involves some linguistic reconfiguration that probably we should take a step back beyond it and see what was really going on.
Okay, so let's do the thing that we do best and kind of back up a little bit, because let's pretend that everybody, is loyal to the show and they just listened to Dr. Lynn Cohick. We've already read, technically, if we're reading the Bible back cover to cover, 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 14 is saying women should remain silent in the churches. They're not allowed to speak, and they have to be in submission as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in church. And this is Paul talking to the church in Corinth. Why is he saying this to them? And then why does he say it again in 1 Timothy? Let's just like set the scene.
Sure. The first piece I will comment on briefly and then go to the main question is, again, I don't think he's saying the same thing to both groups. We're reading it the same way because of our English translations, and the context is different in both places. The problems he's addressing are different in both places, and even the range of options of what he could be saying are different in both situations. And something else that often doesn't get asked is, why doesn't he say something quite similar to every other church he writes to?
That's a good point, because to me it sounds like, well, he said it twice. He obviously meant it, but that's a good point. If he meant it, he would have said it to every church.
Mhm.
So it
Now,
sounds like only these 2 churches have an issue that's similar?
or at least it could be translated in a way that's similar.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I would go there. But I think both of these churches are Paul's 2 top problem churches
They are the 2 top problem churches?
in his whole circuit. Yeah,
The church in Corinth, and what is this church in Timothy? The
Ephesus.
Ephesus. Okay.
It's on the west coast of Turkey. It's basically facing the part of the water where John gets exiled on the Isle of Patmos later.
Okay.
It's right there. And Corinth is on the opposite side of the water from Turkey, and it faces the Ephesus. They kind of face each other across the water. But they're both 2 of the problem churches in the first century circuit.
Okay. And what time period is this happening? Like, how many years after Jesus is this issue arising? Because you would think, I mean, I know you'll correct me, but Jesus just died. And so shouldn't everyone be kind of like on fire for God still? Like, shouldn't like the fire of the Holy Spirit in Acts and Pentecost still be kind of blazing through the land? It seems like there's other religions taking place that he's addressing.
Yes, Jesus died approximately 20 years earlier, just to put it
Okay.
in a rough context. So a whole generation of people have grown up since then,
Okay.
roughly. But many people that knew that day are still around. So
Okay.
it's been 2 decades, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
The other religions have always been there before Christianity came along. And so you have the Greco religions, you have the Roman religions, and a new one that's on the scene as of just a few years before Jesus' birth is emperor worship. So emperor
Emperor
worship,
worship.
well, yeah,
So
that
like
was
Julius Caesar, like the Roman emperor. He is
His
now a god.
his grandson took on deity titles and became the god over all the other gods approximately, well, a couple decades before Jesus' birth. So in addition to all the Greek and Roman gods and goddesses, you now have Caesar as an ultimate kind of god. And
Mm.
statues to Caesar are being built, temples to Caesar are being built. And on the spectrum, Corinth is fine with this. This is what their city is. It's a pro-Roman city. It's actually it was a destroyed Greek city that became rebuilt by the Romans, and it's very pro-Roman. Even though they're surrounded by Greeks, that's a pro-Roman city. And Ephesus is a pro-Greek city, and they don't really care so much about the Roman emperor worship. They care about one of the Greek goddesses, and that's Artemis.
Okay.
And that makes them very different from each other. For some of the ways that will impact our understanding of this text in Timothy, but they're also very entrenched in their areas. So any Christian movement in both cities is going to be faced with constant struggle with these two major groups, the pro-Caesar worship group in Corinth and the pro-Artemis group in Ephesus.
If you were a Christian in Corinth or in Ephesus, were you attacked or were you accepted, or what was the vibe?
The vibe was if you went shopping at the grocery store, certain items in the store were totally devoted to the gods and goddesses in ways that would cause you not to be able to eat of that food. So you had to source your food a different way.
Like, this food has been dedicated to this goddess or sacrificed to this goddess, and you're like, well, I'm not going to eat that.
Right. That kind of
Oh, I
thing
see.
was common. So the typical Christ follower was sometimes pushed to the marginal edge of some of these societies in these cities.
Okay. Okay.
This was also true for the Jewish person. It wasn't that different for Jews and Christians. It was pretty
Okay.
similar.
So why is he telling people to be quiet so often? Just because he's like, stop worshiping them. But it's specifically for women.
Yeah, for Corinth, the issue is different because the verbs are different in Greek, although they're translated the same way in English. Greek has a couple of verbs that strictly mean to be silent or to become silent, and
Okay.
there's sipao and sigao. The difference between them is very muddy in the lexicons and dictionaries that we have, but there's one for if you're noisy, be quiet, and there's another one for maintaining silence, being silent and not raising some noise if something happens. And that research is not completed on the difference between sapao and sagao. One of them is used in the Corinthian section that you mentioned in chapter 14. The other one is used when Jesus tells the storm to be quiet, and it's a different verb. So that's hush up and be quiet. And so why a different verb? That's underexplored, really. And I haven't spent much time on the Corinthian language issues to sort that one out, but it's not the same verb at all that's in the First Timothy passage. We have hesukia, which is a noun. It's not a verb. And the meaning for hesukia is related to the Greek goddesses more than it is anything about silence.
Okay. Because, I mean, in the English translation, like, if I didn't have Dr. Sedlacek in the room, then I would have just read 1 Corinthians saying women should remain silent. They're not allowed to speak. They have to be in submission. And then if I read 1 Timothy, it would say, I do not permit a woman to teach or assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. And then it talks about Adam and Eve all of a sudden. And then it talks about how women are going to be saved through childbearing. It's same, but different. So what should I, as a educated exegetical Christian, be paying attention to?
The first thing to do is pay very careful attention to very slight differences in texts. They point to something different being the inferred thing. And it could be that the translators have missed the thing that's different. There's always that chance. Now, without knowing Greek or in some cases Hebrew, a person reading their English Bible isn't necessarily going to be able to ferret out all of the things that are going on, produce the English. But one thing you can do with English Bibles is grab about 10 or 12 of them, compare them side by side for one verse, and then if you think it's related to another verse, compare about the same 10 or 12 on that verse and see how many of them really say the same thing across the translation.
Is that what you do?
That's one thing that can be done. I don't generally
Oh my
do that,
gosh.
but I do compare that sometimes, yes.
Oh my gosh.
That's not my first step, but that's something you can do just to see, even though it seems like these two texts are related. They've got some of the same language. 9 out of 10 Bibles don't have them translated the same way as each other, meaning they still see some difference here between these two texts. Another thing to watch out for is that this involves at least looking up, not necessarily knowing Greek, but looking up that Greek word in a lexicon and just reading the English definitions. That you can do with the Strong's Concordance, which a lot of people have, or online tools, which a lot of people have. And you'll realize that sometimes you have close synonyms, but they aren't the same word in both texts. They're close. They have something in common, but they're not exactly the same. And something that occurs to me as well, if you are reading the English Bible and you believe that it's saying this one thing, look at other English texts that do say something exactly like that. Not about the women or the silence thing, but just about the verbal connection to its direct object or something like this, and see what is underlying that English expression. You'll often find it's completely different Greek words in word order. And then you have to scratch your head and think, well, if Paul really wanted to say that, why didn't he use that phrase that's right there in the Gospel of Mark? He didn't. He used a different expression, and this makes us scratch our heads and think, well, what is he really saying? One of the ways that I'll read, well, you've read the verse in English. I don't know which version it was. NIV, I think.
NIV, yeah.
I've seen it where it says, exercise authority instead of assume authority. I don't permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. And the exercise authority has a completely different Greek words that go behind it. It's echein, exousia, and we see it all over in the Gospels when Jesus gives his disciples the power to exercise authority over the demons. Same language, exercise authority. Totally different Greek words, not the ones that Paul has in this text. So that started my brain. The other thing that made me completely, I don't know, what's the right word I want? Lit a fire inside me to research this thing out and really study it. I went and looked up the keyword authentane, which we have somewhere down in our notes a little further. Authentane is the word that's translated assume authority here in the NIV, exercise authority in some translations. And there's been a debate whether that word has been translated fairly. Some think it just has a pejorative meaning, and so they translated it domineer or something like that. And there's some fine scholars that think it means that. They're trying to get away from an absolute reading that women are not to have authority. So they would say, oh, just don't domineer and you still fit. Well, the problem with most of this lexical research is they're trying to find a solution to a problem caused by the translations. What does the Greek word authentane actually mean? You have to do, and this is where this is one of my first steps, is I look up every instance of the verb authentane in all of the Greek literature that is known to us. And what does it mean here? 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 I've worked up a data sheet of all of this stuff, and there's two prominent meanings for this verb, and none of which seems to fit our context if we're trying to take it as some kind of church rules kind of context.
Okay.
One of them is that authentane has a common English word that almost nobody uses to translate it with. Authenticate. The English verb authenticate directly derived from this Greek verb, and it doesn't mean anything about having authority over. So what do we use it for is actually similar to what a lot of the Greek uses of authentane are. Let's say I wrote a book. In the ancient world, nobody has a printing press. Nobody's going to copy it. So the only way for people to get copies is for some scribe to sit down, handwrite out a copy. And if you know anything about people handwriting something where they're copying something, the chances they'll make mistakes are pretty high.
Right.
So then that book gets copied for a scholar somewhere in a different continent. And what they do is they send the book back to the author so the author can look at it and say, yep, that's my work. And they authenticate it and send it back to them.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have an authorized or an authenticated copy. The author himself said, yep, that's a copy of my work. That's one of the main ways this verb is used, and this context doesn't fit that meaning. There's no way that he's dealing with an authentication issue here. So,
yeah, it doesn't really seem like that would make sense with I do not permit a woman to teach or authenticate a man.
Right.
Over a man?
Right. How does that work? There's no real way to solve the puzzle with that meaning, but that's one of the main ways it's used. The other main way it's used is for a king or a general or some kind of leader who wants to tell somebody, I need that guy dead. And they are worried What if it's really not coming from the king? I need to make sure the king said so before I go execute this guy. And so then they get authorized that, yes, it's from the king. And so they go do it. But what it is he authenticated a kill.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so
Kind of like gave the green light.
yeah, it's similar to what militaries and big headquarters of nations or groups of nations sometimes do. And so that's another thing that it could mean. And there's no real way to see that happening here. Like at first read, we wouldn't automatically think that Paul is dealing with a hitman.
Right.
Probably not. And so we're struggling to find something that fits it. And then when we look at nouns, adjectives that are derived from the same verbal root, we run into the same problem. And so I went to Liddell Scott Jones. Liddell Scott Jones is one of the long-standing classical Greek dictionaries. You can also go to Bauer, Arendt, Gingrich, and Danker. That's a fairly standard standby for New Testament Greek uses. And both of them say that this verb means to exercise authority over. In the footnotes in the entry, it's the main piece of evidence that they bring is that Saint Augustine, the church father from around 400, 3 something to 4 something, he certainly went over that century time, he said it means that. But he said it meant that because red flag, because what we have, if we look this up in a standard dictionary, is circular reasoning. Augustine said it means that because it means that in this verse. If we're at this verse and we don't know what it means, we can't use the circular loop in our standard dictionaries to create that meaning for us. We can't depend on circular reasoning or logic. It's a faulty wheel. That's when you've got to do what I suggested first, is start looking up all the incidents and saying, what does it mean here? What does it mean here? And even in the classic literature, you'll sometimes find that the reference translation edition that's sitting in the shelf has a mistranslation in it. So you can't depend even on the English translation of those texts, even though they're probably more secure than some of the other translations of our English New Testament are from various groups. Still, you still have to be able to critique it. And I found a few of those where really at the core of the context was a hit that someone was authorizing, but it didn't get translated like it was. And sometimes deep contextual reading around each instance is needed. A couple paragraphs at least before and after. So I did that. I did that for this root word. And when I first presented a paper on the problems in 1 Timothy 2:12, just verse 12 alone, I realized that there's 6 problems in this one verse. In the New Testament, when you're reading it to translate it, you're dealing with critical commentaries that critique each aspect of that translation to get to your typical English Bible. Most verses are pretty clear-cut and straightforward. Occasionally, you're going to come across a verse where the issue is huge on one thing. It's very rare that you have a verse that has 6 major issues in one verse. This one does. And the first is the meaning of authentane. It has a huge problem with determining what it actually does mean. I've been to the SBL meetings and other similar conferences where the debate is thick, and I look at the papers on each side and I still don't see a clear-cut solution on the word's meaning. I can only see what the data piled up looks like. And both of the definitions I gave, which are the main 2, don't neatly fit what Paul seems to be doing here. That's something to tuck in the back of our minds. It will build into something further.
Okay.
One of those matters. The other issue is we have 2 infinitives that are butted together. You can't see it in English, but to teach and to exercise authority over, well, the to preposition kind of lets us know they're both infinitives. In Greek, it's rare to have 2 infinitives butted together, and it's even more rare to have them separated with words in between. And in English, they don't have words in between. They're put together, to teach and to whatever authority, right? They're both right together. In Greek, the teach one is first, and then the do not permit phrase, and then the authentane, or whatever it means, often translated exercise authority over, is second. And that's a very weird syntax. What differences should we understand from the meaning because the 2 infinitives are separated as if they're 2 clauses? That's odd. The third issue in here is that the translation committees have assumed mostly that the woman is the subject for teach and assume authority over. In English, you can't tell why that's a problem. In Greek, the word woman is what's called a dative case. A dative case is a reference case, like two or for a woman. And that means it's not a subject. And so the exercise authority over and the teach verb seems to be without a typical case that would be a subject for those verbs. Now, for infinitives, the main case that they take is accusative. They can, on rare occasions, seem to take a dative or genitive, but usually the context will support why it's not accusative. Here we don't have anything in the context that says the word for woman has to be in a special case. So in my typical Greek reading brain, I'm thinking I would expect the word woman to be a different case ending than the one it is if it is the subject of teach or exercise authority. The grammar of the sentence could read, I do not permit to teach for a woman or to a woman something. No one translates it that way.
So how should I read it? If I read it the most translated, accurate way, Greek to English, who cares about grammar? Throw it out the window. Like if it sounds crazy, this is what the translation says. How should I read this?
The English translation?
Yeah. Of First Timothy.
One of my papers that I presented at one of the regional SBLs is that the English translation in most Bibles for this verse doesn't reflect what the Greek is saying. So you can't read the English and take something from it.
What does it say in Greek?
That's what we're trying to sort out. So we've got the woman, which may not be the subject of these infinitives. We have two infinitives together, which may not be sequential infinitives like they're presented here. We have exercise authority over, which might not mean exercise authority over. And then we come to the word man. It's translated over a man. And in Greek, the word man is not in the right case for it meaning over a man. The word man here, a genitive, you could translate it over, but over is only one of 36 options for the genitive case meaning, and almost nobody's explored the other 35.
Okay.
When I pull a reference Greek grammar off the shelf, I get about 36 meanings for genitive cases. And so there's something about this man that's related to this alphantane word that we don't know the exact relationship for, and yet it's being translated as if alphantane is over the man without a reason to pick that one.
Okay.
Then we come to the last word, which is hesukia in the verse. And hesukia, and that's the sixth problem, is translated be quiet. Hesukia is not the normal word for be quiet. The word sepao, which Jesus says to the storm as a verb, be quiet, is the normal one. What this word is a noun. It's not a verb. And it's also the name of another Greek goddess. Artemis is one that's really huge in Ephesus, but Hesukia is another one. And she's actually related to Artemis, which we might not know unless we study the Greek goddesses a little bit. And her role in the Greek goddesses world, gods and goddesses, is to solve problems of tension between gods that are about to go to war with each other. Her role isn't quietness, although she can assume the role of quietness to get the job done. Her role is making things peaceful between the gods that are about to upset each other. And this word should be translated.
Is translated to Hesukia or Hapao, and that is also the name of a goddess.
The word Hesukia is the name of a goddess, but the name of this goddess was used to talk about the quality of tranquility, peacefulness, and making peace. And so one question somebody might ask is, well, that's not the main word for peace either. A different word is, and it's Irene. Well, guess what? That's another Greek goddess. We don't realize how much these words are connected to these Greek deities, and therefore the meaning we associate with them needs to be a quality or a trait that those deities were epitomizing.
Okay.
And the trait that Hesukia epitomizes is calmness and peacefulness, making peace at home, while Irene, the other word for peace, is making peace with enemies abroad. And so some kind of peacemaker at home is the main meaning of Hesukia. So I'll do weird things like this sometimes. I decided, let me see, because I know the Greek goddesses often have a Roman counterpart. What is the Roman counterpart for Hesukia?
Okay.
Silencia.
Silence? Like the opposite of being tranquil is to be silent?
No, not the opposite. The Roman counterpart, because the Romans copied a lot of Greek deities, just gave them different names. Like Artemis in Greek culture is Diana in Roman, while Hesukia in Greek is Silencia in Roman. So from the Roman perspective, they only appreciated the silence aspect of this goddess.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry.
And now that's why so many of and if you look at the Latin Vulgate, it's translated silencia. In other words, that's what they expected women to do. But we're looking at a 4th century problem that was introduced in the Latin Bible and Augustine's understanding of the Greek word, because he's also a Latin father, not a Greek father. He comes from the Roman side of the Greco-Roman world, not the Greek side, and he's making comments on the Greek language based on what's now obvious a Roman misidentification. And he's commenting on Hesychia and Alphantine because of the translation of Hesychia. Misidentifying what Hesychia is doing causes the meaning of the whole passage to change, and therefore strange and foreign words get meanings that really aren't about those words.
So it's kind of like the same thing of being like, hey, you seem really angry. You should find your inner peace and calm down versus like, you need to shut up. Is that accurate interpretation of like what has happened now?
Close. I would say that the women in the Ephesus church have the ability to create harmony, and Paul is just asking them to create this harmony.
But it's been translated as be silent.
Yes, because of the connection to the Roman deity and to Augustine's statement, that must mean what he thinks it means. And that's how the dictionaries have had it.
Whoa.
So this is in order to solve some of these problems, you can't depend on standard Greek grammars and lexicons or dictionaries. You have to get behind the brainwork of how those were created and why, and critique the process of how they're created, and then expand our understanding of the first century world, and then realize possible places where mistranslation can creep in. Now, one of the things that happened in what we call the Reformation was a return to the Greek text and not an over-reliance on the Latin text. That helped in some places. But this place here, it never helped it, never affected it. The Greek interpretations of this verse, the Western interpretations of this verse are still securely linked to the Latin Vulgate rather than the Greek Bible and on the Silencia part.
Okay, so I understand, like, that in itself is so valuable because, like, I would have never thought, how was the language formed, let alone what was it translated to, and now that affects the modern day English understanding and translation of it. So I feel like that creates so much context linguistically, but physically, the context of why did these women need to have inner peace? What were they doing that he had to show up in Ephesus and be like, guys, let's all zen it out.
Yeah.
What's going on? What's going on with these ladies?
What caused the problem? And one of the things that you can do, and you can probably do this with an English Bible with a fair degree of access to the problem, is just notice all through the books addressed to Ephesus what the problem is around the women. You can do this by looking at 1st, 2nd Timothy, the book of Ephesians, because all three of those are addressed to the people in Ephesus one way or another. And I'll address another problem that's not well known in New Testament studies, but it does affect things. One of them is that we have all of the New Testament written out as in our Bibles as Gospels, Acts, Paul's letters, other letters, which we sometimes call general letters, and then Revelation. So we've organized it by grouping of things we think are similar.
Yeah.
It's not chronological. Some people have gone through and restructured everything chronologically, putting James first and then Galatians and then...
I think I might have one of those Bibles, yeah.
That's another way to do it. And you should read a chronological Bible from time to time, just so you know what came out and when, what concerned people in what order.
Okay.
A third one that nobody's done is group the Bible texts around locations that had to receive these texts first.
So what else is going on nearby?
Right. So all the books to Ephesus in one spot in the Bible, then all the books to Corinth in another, all the books to this group in another place, all the books to a different group in another place. And you start to think not so much what Paul is about, but what are the people's problems in this area?
Yeah.
And if you do that for everything written to Ephesus, two things emerge. The image of Artemis is casting a long shadow over the people there. Christians in Ephesus are in danger of syncretizing with the Artemis worship. And some of the women who are in Ephesus are connected to the patricians. And one of their responsibilities is to host events, teaching events.
Sorry, what's a patrician?
Patrician is a certain class of citizen in the Roman Empire where they need to host arts, crafts, speeches, teaching events. They need to be, it could be fun, but usually that was the way they gave back to their community. Think of it as a wealthy tax.
Okay.
The wealthy class gave back to the community by hosting events.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty good thing generally.
This one is dedicated to pagan worship.
Some of the patrician class that have entered the Christian walk are very connected to the Artemis elite, because to be elite in Ephesus means you need to be connected to the Artemisium, the Artemis
You,
worship.
you have to.
It's part of how you become an elite in that area. Well, if somebody from that group converts,
So like we're talking about like Hollywood now.
okay, that's a decent example in the modern world. Yeah. How do you, let's say, okay, in the Hollywood or the Las Vegas community, some key people come to Christ and they have to start getting discipled. And well, tomorrow they're going to host another event because this is what they've always done. Okay. Now put yourself in an Ephesian wealthy woman's situation where she's connected to these ladies over at the Artemis Temple. And in order to hold her patrician status, she needs to host an event. Well, let's invite so-and-so to come speak, and they're going to teach us about something. Who does it? Under whose authority is it being done? And if it's done to teach people about religious instruction, and that instruction is different from the gospel or different from what Paul has given in the church, there's a rift right away. There's a problem. And so if you pick up on these clues, there are people who have itching ears to hear things other than what Paul has presented. There are people who are sponsoring paid speakers who aren't worthy of their hire. There's all these kind of phrases, and when you build them up to a composite picture, somebody's supporting false teachers in Ephesus, and they're doing it on the authority that they're a patrician, not on the authority that this is what the gospel is coming from God.
They're doing it on the authority that they're a patrician, not that this is coming from God. What does that mean? Like they're doing this to stay in that elite group versus to spread the word of God, or am I missing something?
Well, when the decision comes in to hire this teacher to teach, it's done on the basis of what keeps the position fluid in the patrician class.
Okay.
And less done on this guy or this lady, whomever it is actually representing the message that Paul gave last week or 3 weeks ago. And so what Paul is writing here is about authority to put teachers in front of people who are teaching them religiously. And there seems to be some problem here. And the text, in my opinion, I wish he was more direct and said these things just like, step one, don't let the patrician class hire visiting speakers from who knows where. If he had said it that way, I don't think he would have said it this way. But I also think if he had said it that way, he would have ruined some of these people's chance of staying in that patrician class and meeting other people. The spread of the gospel might have been hindered if he said it that way.
I see. So essentially, Paul is writing to Timothy in Ephesus to say, this thing that keeps happening within society, these patricianers and these events, they are a little bit too like paganistic. Like they keep inviting people and supporting this Artemis regime, and you did not do that. That's hurting your society. You guys need to be more Christ focused, even though it's not really what society's is doing in a popular way. Like, is that what he's saying? He's like, you guys are doing it this way. You guys are worshiping Artemis. Don't do that. Instead, this Artemis thing can't be so central. I feel like I'm not saying this well.
Well, all of us are grasping the right language to say it with. So don't worry if you haven't said it well the first try through. The thing is something, and when you look at John's letters to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, he's dealing with the same issue, but he says everything very differently. He gets down to syncretistic practice. What is syncretism? When somebody says, well, I'm going to follow God, and by the way, on Wednesdays, I'm going to go worship this idol. That's
it sounds like that's still an issue.
Yeah, it's still an issue today under different labels and different disguises. But syncretism, many of the apostles were writing in what I call an anti-syncretistic tone. If
they
you
were like, you're all or nothing.
Other religions, get out of that thing and get over here to what God wants.
So this is an anti-synchronistic type of letter from Paul to Timothy.
Yeah, and since it's to Timothy directly rather than the local church, this is a framework for Timothy to think through as Timothy does the anti-syncretistic work, rather than a direct response to the people in Ephesus. And sometimes we have 2 problems when interpreting this verse. One of the problems is that we approach it like every single thing in the whole Bible is written directly to me.
Yeah.
Not all of it is.
Yeah.
And secondly, we don't make a distinction when Paul is writing to a church and when Paul is writing to a pastor. And here, this letter is to a pastor. It's about problems in the church, but it's written to a pastor.
Okay.
So Paul, the pastor, is the person, and Timothy's more than a pastor. He's in charge of a large city church that has many regional satellites. So Paul is writing to him, trying to give him a framework for how to proceed. And The next step I would like to say something about is that when you read through the whole paragraph, which we did not do, it starts at verse 8, runs down through verse 15. We get a number of clues that the concern or the issue that Paul has is related somehow to the Artemis worship.
Let's please go into that, because in today's culture, it's saying don't show too much skin, be quiet, don't be too assuming. I mean, that's at least how I've heard it be interpreted.
To a certain extent, many groups have reinterpreted some of these passages to deal with their own cultural context problems. And some of what we're seeing has been that. It's been some of our Western American churches trying to adapt Paul's message for the problems we see in our own society. But sometimes along that way, the original message can get lost.
Okay, so where's the Artemis worship that we miss today?
Yeah. When we look at, first of all, verse 12, we said before that one of those meanings for Alfontaine was to authorize hits. And we said also that over a man is not the only way to take the genitive case on the word man. It might not be over a man. It might be some other relationship to man.
Okay.
There's a story. I found it in some of the Greek literature that I was wading through, and it's that Artemis herself was deceived. She was deceived by her brother, and she authorized a hit on a man, a murder. She authorized a murder on another man who was her lover.
This is part of like the mythology of Artemis.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why the latter part of the verse says what it says.
I think so.
Because it's referencing Artemis, not women in general.
Yes.
So when it says...
So this woman authorizing the hit on the man, you've got all the key words in the right context to make us think about Artemis authorizing a hit on her lover. Now, she actually fires the arrow that kills him. So it's part of the Greek mythology. It's because her brother was upset that she had fallen in love with a mortal. So he decided to deceive her, and the deception is intentional. He deceived her, and then she authorized it. For Paul to be writing about a problem around who should preach, there's a very completely different way he could have gone about it than what's here in 1 Timothy chapter 2. But what's here is like, okay, we've got authorization of a hit. We've got a man who got hit. We've got a woman in the context. We've got a teaching that's about something. And we also have a deception at the end of the passage, because in the story, it's Artemis who was deceived. After all, it wasn't her fault. She was deceived. Until you're embedded in a situation where Artemis culture is number one, so number one that they won't even build a Caesar temple in Ephesus because they don't want to offend Artemis. And other New Testament era cities had. The Corinth church area, well, not the church, but the city, they had a Caesar. Over in Palestine, they had Caesar places. Over in Pergamum, just north of Ephesus, they had a Caesar temple, but not Ephesus. Ephesus did not want to offend Artemis. And when you start unpacking all the Artemis-like references in here, you get way too many in a short paragraph for it not to be about Artemis.
And you're saying specifically, because it says, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. Okay, we're talking about Adam and Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. And so now hearing that, you're saying that's woman is Artemis, who was deceived and became a sinner when she committed murder. Why was the need for Adam and Eve? Like, what was that mention needed for?
Artemis is often involved in some creation myths too. And how
was I supposed to know that?
Right. And here's another problem related to biblical studies is that we sometimes read our Bible for all it's worth, as some books tell us. Read your Bible for all. I love the book, by the way, but we've got to read other first century literature.
Big fan. Yeah, but I don't have time for that. I don't have time to read all first century literature. I can barely read this century's literature.
Yeah. I can't read this century's literature, I promise. That's too much. But when a person is a biblical scholar, when a person is a New Testament exegete, they're responsible to dig out all of these kind of things and make people aware of them.
Thank God for you.
And some do this fairly well. Some don't know how to do this, honestly. And I don't think the passage is about women being ordained as pastors or not. I don't think this has anything to do with the ordination of elders or preachers or teachers in the local churches. I think this has to do with anti-syncretistic issues going on in Ephesus to get the women who want to follow Christ out of the Artemis cult and just into Christ. And Paul doesn't want them to be hiring teachers or teaching these things that involve Artemis in with their Christian teaching. And he corrects them by giving the proper order of creation. which was a misunderstood thing at Ephesus. Oh, Adam was created first. Why does it matter if he's first? Unless you have a theology that says the first man was created second.
So Ephesus had a creation myth where Artemis was created before
Different.
Adam.
They had a creation myth that was not like the biblical creation story. So Paul uses the biblical creation story to correct it. Now, I've read opinions where Paul is using the created order to infer hierarchy. Nowhere does he say that this is hierarchy. He is correcting a chronological order because an incorrect chronological order was assumed in the Artemis myth culture. He's correcting a bunch of things that start to ring the Artemis bell. I want to suggest a good book to read just to get there's other thicker, more academic works on Artemis, but there's an easy-to-read paperback recently published by Sandra Glahn, Glahn. I think she's from Dallas Theological Seminary. Nobody's Mother is the name of the book. Nobody's Mother, because there's so much popular today, so much literature depicting Artemis as a fertility goddess. She never was historically. She is known for two things. She is known for helping in childbirth or slaying the woman who's about to give birth so she doesn't have to go through the pain of birth. People in Ephesus would pray all the time, "Save me in my childbirth," to Artemis. Now, what's the last part of verse 15 tell us?
But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety.
Not if they pray to Artemis. It's there. You have to pull these pieces out to see them, but it's there. And you have to know what Artemis is and what the Ephesian women did in the first century in order to unpack what Paul is trying to unravel here.
So just like so if they're in a society believing Artemis will save me in childbirth, I pray to her, I'll have a healthy baby, or I just won't experience pain because she'll kill me. This was Paul being like, ladies, don't pray to Artemis. You'll be fine in childbirth. Just pray to God and be holy. And continue in faith, but don't pray to Artemis when you are in the midst of childbearing.
Yeah, and don't follow the cult that does. Get out of that cult. Get unentangled from that cult. Disentangle yourselves.
And have peace within yourself.
Be peacemakers. Yeah, be peacemakers like Hesukia is for the Greeks. I see a lot. And I haven't solved every issue in this passage, but once the bell rings 9 times, when you see things referring to Artemis in, 8 to 15, we've got 8 verses, roughly. If the bell rings 9 times in 8 verses, we have to think this is uncanny, if anything else.
Yeah, when you put it that way.
Mm-hmm. And if it was written to people in Antioch with the same 9 bells ringing, it wouldn't bounce off my head, but it's written to the same city that does worship Artemis.
Like Paul went to all the cities and was like, same issue, like same verse, because they're not worshiping Artemis in this way in that city. So why would he say it?
Paul does this a lot in a lot of his letters. Something not well known in Galatians. Then we'll jump to another reference just to address a weird Pauline statement.
Okay.
The people in Galatia were self-emasculators. Some of them cut off their sexual organs in order to be celibate for life and make a big statement. So when he starts talking to them about circumcision, he says, you might as well cut it off, meaning you might as well do that pagan thing if you're going to do this. And you have to realize he's making a social pointer to a thing that's only socially making a difference in that place he's writing.
And that's by saying you don't need to be circumcised to be a part of this culture. Because if you're going to circumcise to be a part of the Christian culture, what's the difference between you and the pagans who are emasculating themselves?
Yeah, but why say that to them? Because they have people in their community that do it. He doesn't say that to somebody else.
Yeah, he's not saying that to the people in Ephesus.
And so Paul will often put things in his letters that address the people right in their context. And so if we aren't paying close attention to the close context of the recipients, we're going to miss some of the references, what he's saying and why he's saying it and how that matters rhetorically in his letter.
Which, how would I know? Because I lived 2,000 years later. So when I read this, I'm like, oh, so women can't have to be silent and we have to be modest and we have to just, I can't wear pearls or gold. Because that's my context. I'm not reading it as a woman in Ephesus with this synchronistic society.
Another thing that stood out to me, you mentioned the pearls and stuff. In order to be a good patrician in Ephesus, you needed to adorn yourself like Artemis. And all of these items were part of her typical adornment. So Paul says, don't adorn yourself like that. Get away from that goddess. Come out from her and be separate. Same language God gave Israel. Come out from the nations and be separate. Paul is saying it in a different way to the ladies in Artemis.
It's not, because today I don't, like, I have gold earrings, I have a gold ring, but I'm not doing it to emulate Artemis. So
No.
it's understanding that, like, my actions are driven by different decisions. It doesn't, like, by proxy connect me to something that I was unwillingly, like I wear gold because I like gold, not because I worship Artemis. So we can't take that and apply it today.
And I think Christians in different eras and different cultures have misapplied a lot of these statements because they didn't know what they referred to.
Right.
And I'm seeing this as a general theme. When we
Throughout the
don't know
Bible?
what throughout the Bible, be anti-syncretistic. If the pagan religions are doing something, don't get involved in that. Stay away from that. Keep a clear distinction between that stuff and what God wants us to do. John's doing it in his 7 letters to the 7 churches. Peter is doing it in the Peter letter. Paul is doing it throughout all the Pauline letters, although his statements are very different from one letter to the next. And if we take Paul's letters and all of the New Testament books to be generalized for the whole church, for the whole Christian movement, we can't just grab all the specific one-off phrases and say that's what makes it biblical Christianity. You have to understand what the one-off phrases were doing then and realize the underlying principle was anti-syncretistic to the pagan religions. And always apply that, look for ways to apply that today.
Which, like, what a relief. What a relief that I today don't have to read the entire Bible and apply every single thing to my life, because I don't live in a million different communities that each individual were applying to. I get to almost benefit from observing and learning from their mistakes and taking a general be anti-syncretistic lesson out of it.
Yeah. And like in one place, it's about imitating the gods, the Greek and Roman gods. Don't imitate them. Don't wear what they wear. Don't say the things they say. And each book, each letter addressed to the church is doing something a little bit different. So it isn't giving us a monolithic set of commands to do. What it's doing is giving us instances of principles being applied, and you have to unpack the specific application of that principle and see what the underlying principle is. Several of my friends have been using a acronym
This is so good.
called the UPSA principle, and it's UPSA. That's the acronym for it. UPSA, not UPS, the freight company, but UPSA. And we just call it the UPSA principle. But what it is universal principle, specific application. And so in the New Testament, you're often seeing specific applications, but not the general principle. In other texts, you might see the general principle with no application. So you have to marry the two and see what the universal principle underlying all these specific applications is. And staying away from the Greek Roman gods is a big one. And you can account for a lot of the specific applications with that one universal principle. Keep God separate. In the Hebrew Bible, God said he will not sit down and eat with the gods and goddesses. He will not share table fellowship with them. It's a weird statement to say, but if you go into the store and the food has already been offered to the gods, and then you take the same food and you offer it in your Thanksgiving meal, and because you're a Christian or if you're Jewish, and you inviting God to be in your midst, then you're forcing God to have fellowship with the gods and goddesses to whom that food is dedicated to. And so the principle is God wants to be separate from all of that stuff. And so anti-syncretistic flavor is what we really see in our New Testament books.
My gosh. I feel like I'm literally reading a different verse now. I feel like when I read this verse, it was, woman can't teach, you can't have authority, you have to be quiet. Some verses about Adam and Eve that seemed out of place to me. And then, hey, women, if you want to be saved in the kingdom of God, have babies. But now it is literally a different verse. It's referencing, I feel like I know backstory, and my gosh, it's so good to have you back on the show.
I want to point one more thing out about verse 15. It's badly mistranslated. It says, yet she will be saved through childbearing, or women will be preserved through the bearing of children, as if bearing was the verb and children was the direct object.
Mm-hmm.
The Greek doesn't say that. It says, and she will be saved through the childbirth, singular, and it's a noun. and it's referring to a specific birth of a specific child.
I wonder who that is.
I think you got it.
Let me rack my brain about a special baby that was born.
Yeah, it's the promised one, the promised Messiah. And this is what it's about. Not being saved through adhering to Artemis practices just so that you can. One thing we often forget, now I know I'm interrupting myself, but childbirth had about a 40% fatality rate in the first century. We don't experience anything close to that today due to modern medicine, but 40% fatality rate is huge. And many a young woman giving birth to a child was very afraid of losing their life. And many people thought Artemis helped that one way or another, either save me physically so I'm fine or kill me before I have to go through intense pain and suffering. And they would pray this prayer to Artemis on the basis of, hey, 40% of us have a bad time with it. Paul is saying that's not what matters. You need to be saved through a childbirth, a specific childbirth. That is the saving thing. And he takes it back to the gospel. That's where real salvation is. And part of this is to just teach. We don't realize how much of this is a thing, but later in the medieval church, we saw the same thing happen when Germany and later England was evangelized. Many of those first people working to help evangelize had to retrain their thinking over time because they were so steeped in the pagan practices. It was very hard to unpack all of those things and get rid of all those things. So I think part of what Paul is doing in this passage is helping Timothy to have resources to help the newly converted pagans to help unpack the problems with their pagan practices so they could get rid of them easier.
Wow. So, I mean, we could just keep going, but it's so specific to this one issue with Artemis that if you don't recognize it, then now for the rest of the chapter, you're going to keep missing those references. Do you feel like the rest of First Timothy is kind of steeped with these types of references, or this is just one section of the letter addressing Artemis worship?
This paragraph from verse 8 to verse 15 has the thickest concentration of things that ring the Artemis bell. And the book by Sandra Glahn, Not My Mother, is a very good book to begin unpacking all the things related to Artemis and how they might impact our understanding of First Timothy. She does not solve in that book all of the issues, and that's fine, but it's a good entry-level point for a reader to kind of see, hey, Artemis is actually here in this book. And other places in First Timothy ping that same Artemis discussion a few other times, but not as heavy as this paragraph. There's a couple other Artemis type books that are a lot more dense in terms of their analysis of Artemis literature and culture, but they're probably best read at the academic level. Sandra's is easy for people to read at the pew level.
The pew level, that's good. Wow.
Pew, the parson, what
parishioner?
Other word can we? Parishioner, that's the word I wanted. My brain
I like
stuck.
that. No, I like that. Maybe from the pulpit and the pew. We could do that. Us Protestants, I'm cool with that.
I grew up with pews, although I've seen a lot of folding chairs too.
That's funny. Okay.
I'll tell you, I've started some new writing projects, and I've never done big writing projects before, and I started 2 of them. Something you may know, I might have said in an earlier session, but I am connected to the Church of the Nazarene, which is also one of the John Wesley heritage groups. So John Wesley was a theologian, and he was more than a theologian, but he was a biblical scholar and theologian in the early 1700s in England. And he was probably one of the first Protestant ministers to engage the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Catholic tradition as well, instead of just ignoring them. And so he engaged a lot of literature broadly in the Christian tradition. And through all of it, he began to formulate something that has been called the doctrine of sanctification in many Western churches now.
Okay.
And before that point, there really wasn't a lot of discussion about it. The Greek Orthodox Church had a long history of discussing it under the label theosis, and the Roman Catholic tradition had discussed it mostly in the Jesuit devotional literature branch, not so much in the core theology branch. But Protestant churches had mostly ignored this, but he also did one other thing. He went all the way back to Tertullian, one of the early fathers before we had these divisions in the church. And most of what he has to say is anchored in Tertullian. And what he does is he shows it from the apostles' writings, the New Testament, through Tertullian, through the Greek fathers, especially Chrysostom, and some of those in the Nicaea region. And then he traces some of the discussion through smaller Protestant movements that retain some of the ideas, and then through the Catholic movement in Spain that retained some of the ideas. And he cohesively pulls it together and he built a doctrine called sanctification. His writing style was such that it reminds you of showing up to a garage sale and you wonder how things are organized. So many people have had trouble sorting out what he was saying in his works. One thing he was not was a systematic theologian or a systematizer. And some of the stuff is in some of the books he wrote. Some of the stuff is embedded down in letters he wrote corresponding to people. And so it's scattered all over his corpus in various places. So a person casually approaching the Wesleyan corpus saying, I wonder what Wesley said about sanctification. Each piece they pick up, they're only going to get part of the message, a part of the idea as it developed over the course of his lifetime. So what I want to do, and I've started, is I want to build out what is it, how is it based on the scriptures? Start with the Torah, then go to the Nevi'im, then go to the Ketuvim, or we might think of it as the Pentateuch, the prophets, the writings, the law, the prophets, the writings, and then the New Testament, Second Temple Jewish literature, which informs how words kept their meanings going from one to the other, which sometimes gets lost in New Testament theologies, and then build out the so what of it all after that. What is it? And then what is the practical implications for the modern believer? So I'm working on that. It's a big work. I don't know how long it'll take me to do it, but that's one thing that's new.
The hardest thing I've ever heard in my life, Dr. Sedlacek. That is intense. My gosh, I can't even fathom what you're doing, but if anybody could do it, it's you. So is that going to be a book that you're writing, or is that going to be a course that you're teaching, or both?
I think both books and courses can be derived from it, but it will be a reference work. That explains things from start to finish. I'm envisioning 10 volumes right now, where the first volume deals with the word meanings, all of the word meanings, and there's a bunch of them. I've already written most of that volume, and I think I'm sitting somewhere around 500-600 pages on all the words that reference the idea and what they mean. And I found whenever you find one of these, it's the right label for it sometimes escapes me, but it's a center pin that holds it all together. I suppose like a
keystone?
Keystone might be a good word for it, or in an umbrella, when you've got all these pieces that come out every direction, you need a spoke that they all come out from. Mm-hmm. It's like that. And what it is the image of God and the image of God language, and how humanity is supposed to be an image of God. And honestly, in most periods of human existence, humanity has failed to be that image in one way or another, in many ways.
It's a good visual. That's a really good visual.
But we don't know what an image is. What does it mean? It sounds theoretical. It sounds very hard to get my mind around. What does that actually mean? How do I be an image? How am I supposed to be an image? Until we remember that the first cultures that God speaks to used temples with images of their God down inside their temples. They have a God that they worship. It's theoretical. It's got a shape. It's got certain eyes. It's got certain whatever on it. But down inside their temple, we call it a statue or an idol, but it's an image of that God. Well, humanity is supposed to be the image of the true God. That's just kind of a starter, but it makes sense now why the prophets say, and you worship the images which can neither see nor hear nor speak. Why? Because the real image of the real God does all those things. Humanity sees, humanity hears, humanity speaks. We're a better image than those clay things in your temples.
That is good stuff. Oh my gosh. Okay,
little
but
pieces of phrases just come to me alive now that I'm thinking through all of Scripture, in the sense that mankind is supposed to be the image of God. And what does that image actually mean? And then
so
these other phrases are coming alive.
And so on that note, reading text like 1 Timothy 2, it's like, well, don't have the image of a God, don't have these pearls and these gold. You're emulating the wrong God. Whoa.
And this is why in other texts, I don't think it's in this passage, but the adornment of people in the worship of God is suggested. Let your adornment be holiness. Why? That's God's image. God wears holiness around him. So we as believers, when we come to worship the true God, we should have holiness around us.
You're good at this. Is this all on your website? Like how are you keeping track of all of your announcements?
I have stubs. On my website. I can pull it up. I haven't looked at it.
Well, I'll link your website below. It's just for anybody listening that wants to continue this conversation with you.
I have a new tab called Projects.
Okay.
And it's like the 5th tab over. It's next to Academics. And under Projects, I have actually none of those that I'm working on. I have some of my older ones. I have a
You got
new
to update your
page.
website.
I do, and staying up to date is pretty hard. Okay.
It is.
No, it's actually not there yet, but it's something I newly drafted.
Wow, that would be so helpful. I mean, just having any of your works and logos, it would be amazing. I will link your website below. I hope that you update it just so anybody listening today can continue learning from you, Dr. Sedlacek. But I just want to say how grateful I am that you're so willing to come back on the show, because it's not like you have a free schedule. It's not like you're not doing anything. You're clearly overbooked, and yet you make time for this. So I just, from the bottom of my heart, this channel is better because you're on it. So thank you so much for giving me your time.
And thank you for having me. I enjoy any conversation I can have with somebody who's definitely interested, and you definitely are, and so are your listeners. So I'm always excited to be on your show.
Thank you so much. Let's find another reason to bring you back, Dr. Sedlacek.
We'll find many, I'm sure.